Welcome to Lyme Time. I'm Allie from the Tick Chicks. We are all more than Lyme disease and chronic illness, and together we stand with you to overcome and rise. I'll bring you closer to the experts in cutting-edge treatments and even a few unexpected ways of healing. I'll ask the questions you want answers to regarding Lyme disease and successful ways of getting you closer to 100%. We are in this together and will not be defined by Lyme. Today, I'm so excited to welcome my guest, Liza Shaw, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist, advanced clinical hypnotherapist, and integrative Lyme Literate health consultant. And I want to read a little bit about Liza and what she, and her past and how she came to be on this path. So Liza became a marriage and family therapist in 1999. And has had a thriving private practice working with individuals, couples, and families in North Carolina ever since. In 2016, Liza's then 15-year-old son was diagnosed with Lyme and co-infections, as well as pandas after falling mysteriously ill and being told by multiple doctors that it was all psychological. Liza was lucky to find a group of other moms who showed her the way to specialty testing and helped her understand how to navigate the mystifying world of Lyme, find an LMFT, and eventually get him into remission. Oh, we'll talk about girlfriends later, but that was key, I'm sure, for you. Around this time, Liza had also been having a multitude of health problems after having 5 surgical procedures in 4 years. Some of the issues had been problematic for most of her life, but they worsened considerably after the surgeries. Sure enough, testing showed that Liza also carried the exact same infections her son had suffered with, Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella, and she began treating with an integrative LMFT. She got into remission after 1 year of intense antibiotic and herbal treatments and learning neural retraining. When the pandemic hit, Liza and her husband were both bit by some strange insects, and they both fell severely ill. They knew immediately what it was. Testing showed her husband was also sick with the same infections that Liza and her son were ill with, and Liza was sick again. She fought hard to get well and hit remission again 1.5 years later. Her husband has been treating for the last 2 years and is finally starting to heal. Throughout the illness process, Liza made a promise to herself that when she got well and could return to work, she would give back to the community that helped her make it through. And so in 2018, she began working with individuals, couples, and families stricken with the Lyme, co-infections, pandas, etc., providing psychological counseling and emotional support, as well as consulting to assist clients in being tested, diagnosed, and treated. She has had the joy of witnessing many of her clients reach remission and considers this to be one of the greatest privileges of her life. I love that last sentence. So welcome, Liza. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That sounds like quite a journey. And sometimes it's a gift, actually, that when a child gets Lyme disease and the parent also has experience with it or knows, or vice versa, some coming first before the children, some coming after the children, but just having that commonality of the disease itself, and really then begin having empathy and compassion and the tools to handle such a disease. How did you find your handling of your son before you were fully integrated into the Lyme disease awareness?
I was, it was pretty much all survival mode. But I think, in hindsight, I look back and I'm just so grateful because I had so many misdiagnoses throughout my life. I actually had been, as I said, I was bit by a tick when I was 13 years old. And then I had multiple problems throughout my life, diagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, migraines, irritable bowel, you name it, but all of them by different specialists, nobody having any idea what caused it, including me. I didn't think there was one common cause. And so my son's diagnosis was definitely mostly horribly difficult, but also a gift because, as you say, it did kind of baptize me by fire and helped me to understand all of it before I started treating myself. And also in hindsight, it left us with, and all of this is guesswork, of course, because there's no research, but my doctors and my son's doctors both think that he's probably congenital.
Yeah, that was my next
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
because it just seems ironic that you and your son have the
yeah,
exact same strains. And
yeah,
then your husband as well, which leads you down
yes,
the whole other path of could it possibly sexually be transmitted?
right. Yeah, that's
Um,
been a question for
but then
sure.
again, you do remember a tick bite, and so that kind of explains things. I have very similar issues with
Mm,
some of my children, and I often wonder what comes first,
yeah, yeah,
really.
it's
But
really, yeah.
I am grateful for the insight that I have with on my own journey to be able
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
carry that into their lives. So today I wanted to talk really in depth about the emotional and psychological ramifications and side effects and other layers upon layers of Lyme disease. And you're an expert in this. Not only do you have personal experience, but you have the degrees behind it to be a consultant with specifically Lyme disease. So let's get into it. Why do these infections create such emotional and psychological hardships?
Oof. Well, it's complicated, and I'm sure that everything that I'm about to share won't be new to you, and it probably won't be new to some of your audience, but hopefully it will bring some kind of like that feeling of like, oh, well, no wonder, right? Like, oh, I get it now, why this is so hard, right? Um, so I'll just mention a whole bunch of different reasons what makes it so difficult. So first, just the basic lack of recognition in the medical community. It creates that stigma that leads to the experience most of us have had, which is to be medically gaslit. Not being told by the doctors that we trust that we are either imagining it or it's all psychological or there's nothing wrong with us, our labs are normal. As Risa, I think Risa's been a recent guest on your show. Her movie was beautifully depicted the experience we all go through. The it increases the already massive stress levels, for patients and families. Lyme is such a complex condition, right? So it also, as we know, it manifests so differently in each person, and by doing that, people don't get recognized as having Lyme disease. And by the time they're diagnosed, they've often seen so many different specialists, dozens and dozens of specialists, and been given multiple diagnoses, like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, as I was. And it leads to that medical fatigue, right? That feeling of there's trauma, even often. And it leaves us, in a lot of ways, dehumanized and mistrusting the medical system.
Mm.
And yet, at the same time, we have to rely on the medical system, right, to get us well. And so we learn to avoid doctors who would gaslight us. We learn to stop trusting doctors. This can be really difficult, especially for parents who have children who have these diseases, because we don't, often, probably more often than not, you start out having no idea what's going on, and you just want to be able to believe the doctor, and you can't. So that's obviously one of many. I've got lots of other reasons, but the big one I think is how poor the medical community treats us. Um, I think it causes problems with the families because so many, I mean, we've had this in my family, and probably every Lyme patient I've talked with says something similar, that at least one person in the family doesn't believe in it, thinks that chronic Lyme is not real. They've read the propaganda about that. so then they, especially if there's like a medical doctor in the family, this can be really problematic. So it can cause all kinds of, rifts among family members. We had some family members who were very skeptical and basically just accused us of bad parenting. And I made a request of all of my family that they watch Under Our Skin and My Kid Is Not Crazy, which is a documentary about pandas. And I said to my family, please do this for us. Do it because you love us and watch it with an open mind. And there were a couple of people who didn't watch these right away. And I basically said to them, until you've watched those movies and can speak with me about them, I don't think there's much we have to say, because there's really nothing to say. There's just gonna be an argument, and I have zero energy for anything like that.
Sure.
So, luckily, thankfully, all of our family got on board.
I think also with some of these, the co-infections or the mast cell, all of the systemic breakdown symptoms that happen, each one individually could be argued.
Exactly.
I mean, do people in your family believe in mold illness triggering Lyme disease?
Yeah.
Do people believe in parasites triggering things? I mean, the list goes on. And we get labeled crazy very early on.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's another thing, that in general, there's a lack of recognition in society, not just medically, right? But that so many people don't believe in chronic Lyme because they've believed the garbage that's out there. Families judge and disbelieve, and, it becomes, in fact, I worked with someone who was accused of Munchausen by proxy when she brought her child to the emergency room with his symptoms, and had DSS called on them, which ensnared them in the highly contentious investigation process. So on top of all of the trauma that they were dealing with, they had to go through insane amounts of investigating and, people showing up at all hours. It was just nasty. It was very contemptuous. And in the end, it was found to be negative. There was no Munchausen's. But she had to really, in addition to all the doctor's appointments and all the rememberings of all the medicines and the supplements and, detoxing and bringing her kid to the sauna to get rid of the mold in his body and stuff. In addition to all of that, she's also having to answer to the Department of Social Services. It's just unbelievable what this poor woman went through.
That's so tragic.
Yeah, it is. People feel constantly under the microscope. You feel judged and condemned, and it's just incredibly psychologically distressing to go through that. And then, of course, the other thing is that we know Lyme is not just Lyme, right? We call it Lyme because it's like a catch-all phrase, but we're talking about all these different diseases, like you said, mold illness, potentially parasites, all the co-infections. There's all the sequelae symptoms and infections that cause these symptoms, and ticks carry all of them. And it's not just ticks either, right? So people say, well, I didn't see a tick, or I never got bit by a tick. Well, guess what? We're pretty sure that the second round I got sick with was mites, skin mites. So there are other fleas can carry, right? We know so many things.
Yeah,
supposedly
mosquitoes, any sort of vector. There's a lot to learn still about Lyme disease, for sure.
Yeah.
And then even if you just say, if you don't have Lyme disease, maybe you have, alpha-gal or something like that. People will say, well, at least you don't have Lyme disease. Meanwhile,
right.
That's still a life-threatening infection from a tick.
That's right. Yeah, and it's a life-altering, right? I've worked with the family whose child got alpha-gal, and there's nothing harder I've raised a kid who has some of these illnesses, and eating becomes so difficult anyway, just because of how sick they feel. And in our case, there's some OCD related to food. But you add to that the fact that now the child has a food allergy, a true, they can't eat meat anymore. And we all know that chicken nuggets are kind of an important staple for kids,
Yeah.
for better or worse. So it's just, oh, the strain on the family, it tears couples apart. My husband and I are so grateful we made it through, because
Yeah.
the stress of it is just, it's hard to explain the kind of stress, at least with, as they say, at least with cancer, God forbid your child has cancer, but you get casseroles, you get support from your family, you get doctors who know that what you're saying is wrong, really is wrong.
Sure.
And yeah, and guess what? Like treatments that were actually tried, clinically trialed, and that we can say with some form of awareness whether it's going to be successful or not based on statistics. We don't have any of that with Lyme. It just feels like it's the Wild West.
It really does. And that brings up a whole other layer, which is the financial aspect of,
Oh yeah.
and the emotional stress, because what you're faced with is going broke through trial and error treatments that may work for your buddy, but might not work for you. And so you're spending a lot of money on a possibility that it might help. And
Exactly.
if you don't have the wherewithal to be going down these rabbit holes, it's quite often people just give up, they resign to, I have Lyme disease. I can't afford to make any progress with this disease.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And when there are those then, who never are even diagnosed because financially they don't have the means to even be in the forums on Facebook to see that, oh, my multitude of symptoms are being caused by this one specific thing. And they just get sort of discarded. These folks can't work. Their lives are pretty much destroyed. And yeah. And of course, if you don't have the fund, I've had clients who've had to sell their houses and end up being basically homeless, like staying with family, to try to get their kids better or families better, or their family members. Most of the adults that I have had clients working with move in with their parents because they can't work anymore, right? And they need that support. So
Right.
the financial strain is just, it's just inexplicable. It's hard to explain. It's hard to, people can't really wrap their minds around this who have not gone through it.
Yes, I have a friend who couldn't work as much, moved in with the parents, only to have the parents' home have mold. And,
Oh yeah.
so actually by trying to make themselves better, they took on a whole other subset of issues with that.
Mhm.
And I don't really think the parents are that open-minded to, like, oh, it's a little mildew in that
Yeah.
one room or whatever. And as
Yeah.
we all know, that can be a massive trigger for Lyme patients in particular, with the mast
Yes.
cells going off.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and add to that the fact that every handyman claims that they're a mold expert. You know what I mean? They've all got their certifications to treat mold, and then they come in and they don't encapsulate anything, and they just blow the God. I've heard some really terrible stories, and it's sad. I'm not laughing because it's funny. I
Right.
guess I'm just laughing because it's really tragic, and it's like I either laugh or I cry about this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, mold, it just adds a whole other layer, and without any research to be able to explain what is the connection between mold illness and Lyme, you're just left to guess again at, what will help and whether or not, I mean, these are big decisions. Do I move out of my house? If I do I sell it? Do I remediate first, right? Do I have the money to remediate when I've spent $100,000 on myself, on my treatments? It's yeah, I mean, these are just multi-layered complex stress situations that cause so much distress in the family. And mhm.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna move on to another one of the things that cause, us indeed incredible stress, and psychological harm, really. I mean, the diseases are so isolating, right? My son spent basically 3 solid years in his bed, in his room. These were during his high school years. These were some of the most important developmental years of his life, I would think. And it's really had an impact on him. And that isolation, thank God for Facebook, right? Thank God for Instagram. It can be kind of a blessing and a curse, because it's, I've certainly had my share of doom scrolling, kind of like scrolling and going, oh, look what everybody else is doing. Look at life happening without me. It's just incredibly depressing. So even, not to mention the fact that these diseases actually likely are causes of depression and anxiety too, not just the circumstances, but the actual biological processes going on probably are causing depression and anxiety. And I think that's probably, and again, it's all just kind of conjecture, but I believe that that's probably caused by brain inflammation and probably just chronic inflammation in the body. So the body's always in a fight or flight state. And this leads us to being chronically anxious and chronically depressed.
Sure. And,
Yeah.
there's the fact that these bacteria can burrow in brain tissue. So
Yes.
quite often you're dealing with depression from a physiological standpoint. Your body's literally breaking down. Your brain is becoming very foggy.
Yeah.
Things aren't as clear as you once were, and it just causes that brain to start sort of shutting down a little bit and introverting. And no, you can't go outside, you can't exercise, you can't get that socialization that we all need.
Mhm.
It is extremely isolating.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and people go on with their lives, and it's difficult not to feel sorry for yourself. I'm sure your audience understand. I mean, it's just so hard to explain to people who haven't gone through this, what a isolating, depressing, anxiety provoking experience it all is. And it's years and years and years long, right? I mean, some people with long COVID are starting to have similar kinds of experiences. Um, in my case, I've actually had so I was in remission now twice, right? But over the last 8 weeks, 8 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with COVID, right? Acute COVID. And ever since then, some of my symptoms have returned. So I've just done another Vibrant Labs test because I want to see what's active. And I'm considering going in again now for round 3 of treatment for Lyme. But this time will probably be like really targeted, like SOT therapy that will be directly targeted at just the infections that seem to have gotten reactivated as of post-COVID. Here's my theory. I think that long COVID may actually be undiagnosed Lyme disease that people didn't know they had. And then they get COVID and like their bodies basically were keeping Lyme at bay for a while in their lives. Maybe it never had shown its head, but that COVID really brings it out in people. It really harms the immune system. And while the body's trying to fight off COVID, the Lyme is having a little party. Lyme and friends, right?
Oh
Having a little
yeah.
party.
Oh yeah. It can activate all sorts of stuff. I don't know. Again, yes, the symptoms are very, very similar. And,
Yeah.
when I had COVID, I felt like one of my longer lasting side effects of that was a re-emergence of, EBV, which had been
Yes.
say for a long
Yes.
time. But I mean, I had those kinds of symptoms as well. And
Yeah.
yes. So it all kind of goes hand in hand. And I do believe that a lot of the good news And the way that we can handle, whether it's COVID, Lyme, PANS, pandas, whatever, is that we can handle it in a lot of similar ways. So even if you don't have a label for what you're going through at a specific time or point in your life, and you're wondering, is it Lyme again? Is it COVID? Is it this or that? A lot of the same treatments are right there because you've been through it before. And you can just start going back into that way of healing and trial and error. And you're taking on SOT treatments, which is going to be, I assume, new for you. And there's a lot of talk about that lately. But, you know, for parents of children with Lyme disease, how does it present initially?
Oh gosh, I mean, so many various ways, right? Because everybody's body is different, right? I'd say my experience, not only as a parent but working with parents, I would say that like kind of the typical progression is that it starts with fatigue that's totally inexplicable. They don't know what's causing it, but the kid suddenly just can't get out of bed. But I've also had some clients whose their kids' first symptoms were psychosis out of nowhere, just sudden, never had any psychiatric problems before. And then they get Bartonella, they get bit by a cat or get a tick that has Bartonella. And, there will be suddenly this child is suicidal. I think it's just so unique to the individual. I've seen kids who, just get suddenly have really bad irritable bowel and other gastrointestinal problems that suddenly show up.
Sure.
So
and sometimes with the kids, we just don't see it initially. We're thinking, oh, they might have a sensitive stomach, or they're they're dehydrated, so they're getting dizzy or what have you. And for teenagers in that age group, since you work a lot with Lyme disease in kids, teenagers, this is what I run up against a lot. The parents are sitting there trying to help them throughout their childhood years and their teenage years, and they're making the meals, they're making sure everything's okay. Then these kids go off to college.
Yes. And
a lot of times the parents are nervous they're going to then just hit a pitfall with the diet alone. And what kinds of advice, what bits of advice do you have for kids in that age group, college age?
I mean, it's so difficult. I've got, my kid is 22 now, and diet, essentially we take the path of least resistance with him with what he eats. Now he is still under our roof, so we still have a little bit more control, or maybe not control, but we can plan things out better since he's here. If your child is off at school, I would say that the most important thing is that the child understands, what the impact is when they eat. If they eat gluten, it's harder if they eat it and it doesn't do anything immediately to them, so they can't tell that it's more of a something that builds up in their bodies as inflammation. It's the advice I would give is, it depends on who I'm talking to. Am I talking to the kid or am I talking to their parents?
Right. Right.
Because for the parents, I would say a lot of it is really that you have to learn to let go and speak to the kid regularly about it, but also that there's really not a whole lot that we have control over until they're back under our roof. And even then, you can't make somebody eat something, right? Or not, stop starving themselves. The child, I would say, I've done a lot of coaching on this regard with kids who are going off to college, to make sure that they plan what they're going to eat, that they understand their limitations, the most important thing, I think, is to know what the alternatives are. Like, don't just cut gluten out, but find where the gluten-free restaurants are, or, where the stuff on campus is that's good and safe to eat, so that they have their plan ahead and they're not waiting till they're starving and, just going to go eat a Chick-fil-A sandwich.
Sure. Which is what they all want, of course.
Exactly. Yes,
And I
yes.
mean, it's not only just the food, it's also sleepless nights, it's partying
Yeah.
and
Yes. Oh,
potential
yeah.
alcohol or the stress from academics. And
Mhm.
especially I've heard from a lot of college athletes who
Mhm.
are on this hamster wheel as well. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden their Lyme disease shows up.
Flares back up.
Yep.
Yeah, I know.
After stress.
Yeah. Yeah, and travel can cause it too. Just the stress of traveling can be so difficult. So if they're going away to college, the
Mhm.
travel itself can be stressful. And the travel, speaking of that, is part of the stress that we all are going through as patients is that a lot of the LLMDs aren't nearby, right? So, for example, we drive 4 hours to get to ours. Um, I had a client who he has really bad sleep apnea, which we're sure is part of this because he didn't have it before he had Lyme, et cetera. And he has to pack up like half of everything he owns that he has to use to sleep with. He has to
Oh
sleep
my
on his
God.
side. He has to sleep with elevation. So he's got like bed risers. He's got these cushions that keep him sideways on the bed. He has to wear this big mouthpiece because CPAP machine failed him. He couldn't use that.
Mm.
He tapes his mouth shut. Like there are just all these things that he has to do. And so traveling is like insanely difficult for this guy. And sleeping in a different bed, and you don't know if you're staying in a hotel whether this bed is going to have a soft enough mattress for the sleeping on your side. So it's just like there's another really, really stressful thing about Lyme, where we don't have a doctor right in our own hometown that can help us with these things.
Sure. Sure. And it's oftentimes just forming a team. There's not going to be one doctor
Yeah,
that is an LLMD and has, integrative medicine background and can do everything and has all the treatments and believes in
yeah,
all of them and all of that. So oftentimes you're going
yeah.
to find a team. And yeah, sometimes you're going to have to travel a bit or
Mhm.
drive
Yeah,
at least and get
yes.
somewhere. I mean, my own wonderful, wonderful doctor is not Lyme literate, but she's my
Mm.
wonderful integrative medicine doctor. She just doesn't
Mhm.
go down the, she's more into symptom treatments, which is great. And that's all I
Yeah,
need now. I
yeah.
really am.
Mhm.
I don't, I'm healed, but yeah,
Yay.
yeah.
Woo. That's
There's
awesome.
so that brings me to sort of, we've discussed a lot of the emotional tolls that happen with Lyme disease, and I
Mhm.
just wondering if you can tell everybody what kinds of options that you can present to your clients and
Mhm.
what kind of work you do
Sure.
and where you're licensed to do certain things and not and all of that good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So I do, within the state of North Carolina, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. So inside it, and how it's determined as to where I'm practicing is actually where the client is, not where I am, right? So if I'm doing Zoom, you can, I don't, it doesn't matter where you live. If you're in North Carolina, you can have psychotherapy, marriage and family therapy with me, or hypnosis, hypnotherapy, that kind of thing. Outside of the state of North Carolina, I provide coaching, consulting, advocacy work related to Lyme and the diseases associated with it. So everything from like I've helped a mom a couple of years back get her young son out of a mental hospital after he'd attempted suicide. And she had learned about Bartonella in some of the Facebook groups that she was in, and she contacted me after she saw the stria. I think that's how you say it. I never know how
Mm-hmm.
to pronounce that word, stria. But the purple stretch marks, and her son, they were all over her son's back and legs, and she just had no idea. She just thought this was a psychiatric problem her son had. And so I worked with the mom and helped her. I advocated on her son's behalf to help her get him out of the mental hospital and to get treated, or sorry, to get tested for Lyme. I think we did a Galaxy test on him, and not just for Lyme, but all the main co-infections and stuff. And he, sure enough, had Bartonella, like off the charts. And so he's been treating, and he's, thank God, doing a lot better, still working really hard to get well. I've had, you mentioned mold before. I worked with a woman who was working in a hair salon that every time she walked in that door, she would feel dizzy, cough really bad, couldn't breathe well, headaches, it was just clear as day to me that probably there's mold in in the shop. So I helped her to approach her boss in a non-threatening way and helped support her so that she eventually was able to convince her boss to treat or to test the salon. And eventually, they did find out that there was mold. They were able to remediate the mold. And she started feeling a whole lot better after that. And then we helped her to detox to get the mold, the mycotoxins, using natural treatments. And I've worked with some of the most interesting work I've done, I would say, is coaching Lyme consulting or chronic illness consulting for people who have Morgellons disease. Morgellons, boy, you want to talk about an even worse stigma than Lyme. Doctors, even most Lyme doctors, don't understand Morgellons and won't assume Morgellons when they see, for example, like a client that I worked with had really bad manifestations in their skin. Now, he couldn't see any fibers or anything like that, but just a lot of redness and, lesions. And even his Lyme doctor didn't know what to do with them. And so I referred him to Dr. She's not a doctor, nurse practitioner, Ginger Savely, who's in Washington, D.C. And she's one of the few, very few, who, understand how to treat Morgellons in addition to Lyme. So that was really a fascinating opportunity that I had with them. And then I also do some advocacy kind of on the national level where I work with the Center for Lyme Action. We just had last month our Lyme Fly-In is what it's called. And over 300 volunteers came together from our, in front of our Zoom cameras and met with Congress people's assistants, Congress as well as Senate. And we advocated for a bunch of really important legislation that we are asking to be funded so that it will support research and just raise awareness, as well as encourage cutting edge creation of new testing opportunities and things like that, so they can create new technologies that'll help get these diseases identified quicker.
I love the Center for Disease because I did that as well. I did that the fly-in, and it was just wonderful. Oh yes, to be able to speak to our state representatives, face to face, and actually put the fire a little bit under their seats and say, come on, we need your help, and it makes an impact. The more people that they have on their screen with similar stories, it's wonderful. So thank you for doing that. So obviously you do Zoom, through your Zoom clients, you can also order testing for them. So
I'm a provider for Vibrant Labs, which I happen to think is the best. And I've experienced most of the specialty labs. I really like this test. It's a very comprehensive test because it's not only looking for all of the main tick-borne illnesses. Some of them, most of the other labs are not even looking for some of the ones that Vibrant looks for because supposedly they're not in America. But it also looks for subspecies. So what are the different types of Borrelia, not just the Burgdorferes, but the Abzellis and the, all the alphabet soup of different types of these pathogens you can find them in the tick-borne Zoomer that Vibrant, that you can order through Vibrant. I also am a provider for Great Plains, which can look for mycotoxins. They have a really good mycotoxin test. They have a great organic acids test that looks for that basically checks out the gut health and sees what's going on in the gut, whether there's candida overgrowth or SIBO or C. diff, or, there's various things that, there's food sensitivity testing and stuff that I can also do with people. And I'm also a provider for Galaxy for the Bartonella triple draw test. It's excellent.
They're all great. And I stand by your choices in terms of the labs that you're using. They're all really wonderful. And
I want to mention something
yes,
really quick. When I do those tests for people, I do the consult for free. So I do not, and I don't mark up the tests at all. I don't put a penny on them for me. I don't get paid at all to do this. It's part of my desire to make a difference because people supported and helped me. And I wished desperately there had been somebody that was willing to test my son. That I would have talked to anybody who would have been willing to do that for me, but it took like 6 doctors before I could find one that was willing to order the Galaxy test. So I do want you to know that's a resource that if your listeners don't have an LLMD and want testing done, I can do that with them through Zoom. We do a free 30-minute consult through Zoom. And then I just placed an order earlier today for a woman whose daughter has, I'm sure she has all of these illnesses, but she's never been diagnosed with any of them.
wow, that's incredible. And some of them you can probably even do in the beauty of your own home, I'm sure.
Yes.
And others,
yeah.
you just send them to a local lab and they submit their blood or whatever, and then you talk about, do you then do follow-up and talk about the results?
I do.
Okay.
Well, you were mentioning doing it in your own home. Vibrant has a little system where it's called a dried blood spot. It's just a little card that comes in the mail, and you prick your finger with the lancet that they send, and you drop 1 or 2 drops of blood on this card, and then you send it off. So there's no it's a finger stick. There's no need for phlebotomy. And this is really useful for kids who are scared of the needles.
Right.
And yes, and then the follow-ups those are not free. I do charge for those, but you don't have to do a follow-up with me at all. I still provide the results in the patient portal that I provide for my clients. And you can take those results and do anything that you want with them, find a doctor you want to work with. You don't ever have to work with me, even if I order the tests for you.
That's wonderful. And you do provide some discounts for supplements and things?
I do. Yeah, that's another aspect of working with me that is a benefit, I think, to my clients. So, we all know how expensive our supplements are. Most of our doctors, that's part of how they earn the extra money that they need in order to cover all their liability insurance, I guess. So I don't mark them up like they do. I usually can save my clients between like 20 to 40% based on what quantity they're buying. The more quantity they get, the higher percentage I can get off of the supplements. And I can usually get just about anything, other than there's a couple of homeopathic products that they don't allow anyone other than MDs or NPs or PAs to purchase. But most, by and large, I can find most products that my clients are using.
And let's say somebody's test comes back conclusive for Lyme disease, and they just aren't in a great financial space. What would you sort of recommend for them in terms of low cost Lyme disease treatments?
Well, I found a lot of the herbal treatments are very effective, very powerful. Rawls protocol, it's not really low cost, but if you really want to get low cost, I'd say Buhner's herbs can be pretty effective and well tolerated financially. I can, like, Woodland Essence is one of the companies that I'm a provider for, so I get those for my clients a lot. And normally they go for between like 75 and 150 per bottle, but I can get them for usually, like I say, between like 20 and 40% less than that.
Okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
and I would imagine a lot of children go on those types of protocols because
Yeah.
because of the lack of substantial side effects.
Yeah. Although it can be difficult because they're sort of bitter, but I've helped some parents to develop some ways to help the kids to take it.
A little
Well,
trickery.
yeah, well, like there's one I can mention, like I've helped, this is how my kids learned how to take pills, is I gave my kids pasta. I think this was probably even before we knew that gluten was bad. They were probably eating gluten pasta, but you can do gluten-free pasta. But if you get like a little macaroni noodle that's cooked, right? And you encourage the child, you challenge the kid, and you just say, I bet you can't swallow that without chewing it. Try it. Just put it in your mouth and swallow it without chewing it. And since it's sort of wet and slimy, it'll go right down, right? And then once it's already swallowed, then I said to my kids, what you just did is exactly what swallowing a pill feels like. And so then we say, next step is try swallowing a pill, and it's going to feel the same way. And so a lot of kids have learned how to take pills that way.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. And what as we kind of wrap things up a little bit, I want to hear from your point of view. Just because people tuning into this particular episode will be very curious about the emotional tolls and the psychological tolls of these diseases, and what kind of advice can you give our warriors who are out there right now feeling emotionally drained and wondering if they'll ever feel normal again? Some people on the verge of giving up or second guessing everything. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I think that having support is so crucial. And so, if you can get support through finding a therapist, that would be really helpful. And there are actually Lyme literate therapists. Now, we're not well organized yet, but if any one of you out there listening is having difficulty finding a therapist that understands Lyme, I'd love for you to reach out to me, because I do have a group of other Lyme literate therapists there's probably about 60 of them that I'm networked with. And so I can reach out and see if there's one in your state or your town that you live in. So I would say therapy, but also find a support group. And there are a lot of support groups on Facebook that don't just meet on Facebook, but they actually do Zoom calls weekly. This was one of my lifelines. I had a caregivers group that I belonged to, and then I also had a patient support group that I belonged to. So I just think that is crucial. We need to know that we are not alone. It helps bust up that isolation. It gives us a feeling of being cared for by others, and that people get it. We don't have to explain. But what's even better, I've had a lot of my clients in bigger cities find other people in the town that have Lyme disease and go and meet up, and when they can, have a smoothie together, or even just go sit in each other's houses in your pajamas and slippers and hang out together. It's been really useful to be able to make sure that people feel like they have people, right? That they're not just alone.
I think it's huge to tap into that. And of course, it's a little easier online because you can share ideas without necessarily putting your face up there or anything. If people are just getting started with group type support groups, but the empowerment that you get from swapping ideas and sharing information and being helpful toward other people. And sometimes there's healing just in helping others or guiding others. And I know that we have a retreat, the Tick Chicks has a retreat once a year, and we bring the experts in to an intimate setting, and we cover all sorts of topics. And it's really cool because after this last one, I had people come up to me and say, we wish there was just a mingling session, and I said, okay, I'll do that for you next time. So I've added
Yeah.
a whole mingling section because everybody's there in the room
Yeah.
and you all have so much in common. And it's so
Yes.
wonderful to then reach out to people. And I don't know, the kids got to know each other and it was great. It was just, it was
That's
a
awesome.
wonderful thing. So, well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh,
And
you're welcome.
I want to make sure that you let everybody know where you can be found.
Sure, sure. Well, the easiest way to find me is you can just text me. My business cell phone is 828-302-2978. And I put it out there. I welcome people to reach out. You can find me on Facebook also. My individual page would be, it's a long because I've had a lot of names in my life, but it's Liza Martin Newman Shaw. So friend me if you want to. I also have a professional page on there, and that's actually called Lyme Time Consulting. My business is called Lyme Time Consulting, so it's kind of cool.
We're in good company.
And I do, that's right. I do have a website also, and it's limetimeconsulting.com. So, just as
And
it
then
sounds.
are you on Instagram as well?
I am on Instagram, but I don't do Instagram that much. I think it's Power to Thrive. Or
Okay.
no, it's Beyond Surviving. It's Beyond Surviving. That's what it is.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. I know.
Yeah. I'm just not on there very much. I barely keep up with my social media because I'm working, and then we just recently moved from our house where we lived in Hickory, North Carolina, down to the beach. So
Oh,
I haven't done a lot with social media other than my, every day I do post through my Lyme Time consulting page and put up as much as I can. I try to get stories out
mm-hmm.
into the Facebook land, like as much as possible, I try to cover Facebook with stuff about Lyme so that so that it becomes like a household word and people really understand that this isn't some random weird, unbelievable illness, that this is something that's every day in the news.
Yeah. Well, our people will find you for sure. And
Yeah,
thank you
great.
so much for your time today. I hope we
Yeah,
can do it again soon. And everyone,
sure.
I encourage you to reach out to Liza any way you can because she's given you so many incredible opportunities for healing right here and even some discounts. So thanks
Yeah.
again, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.